Ah, greetings, traveler. You've found your way back to the Silver Quill Corner. I am Grayfen, the Story Keeper. Long ago, when I was bound to an ancient wizarding family, I learned that stories carry a magic older than time itself. A dark fantasy, a gothic bedtime story. Tonight, as the storm prowls beyond the glass and the candles surrender their final light, listen closely. You are crossing into a world of shadows and memory. Here we drift through bedtime stories drawn from every corner of imagination. Gothic myths, lost histories, and quiet retellings inspired by the magical universe of Harry Potter. If the murmur of quills and the echo of Hogwarts corridors help you rest, press like, subscribe, and let this world fold gently around you. Imagine Wiltshire at dusk, rain pooling in the hollows of marble gargoyles, ivy creeping across pale stone walls as the light shrinks against the coming dark. Inside Malfoy Manor, the glow of chandeliers flickers like breath held too long. Shadows collect in corners. The scent of polish and old secrets lingers thick in the air. Here, a boy grew up to believe correction was love and pride was instruction. Draco was raised in the echo of lineage, the only child in a house that had stood for centuries. From his earliest tongue, he was told he was not just a wizard, but pureblood and Malfoy above all else. His father, Lucius, once among Voldemort's inner circle, taught him that purity protected you, that control mattered more than kindness. Yet behind closed doors, the family whispered regret. The fortress of power they had built had never seen the dawn of victory they once imagined. His mother, Narcissa, soft but unyielding, shielded him from darkness she both loved and feared, her silk gowns a guard against shadows. When the Dark Lord fell, Lucius made a choice many whispered about. He claimed the imperious curse had bound him and used influence to evade punishment. Thus, though his name was wounded, Draco's world was spared ruin. The Malfoy estate remained intact, the facade of dominance intact. Lucius once spoke of sending his son to Durmstrang, where the dark arts were not taboo but taught. Narcissa would hear none of it. Never would her only son vanish into those icy towers. So Draco's fate was drawn to Hogwarts, and to the boy with a scar that haunted every whisper. Draco learned early to emulate his father's confidence, not his fear. He heard tales of the boy who lived long before he reached Hogwarts, legends of survival that Lucius found comforting, for they hinted at power unseen. In whispered councils, some believed Harry might yet become a dark champion, worthy of alliance. Draco's offer of friendship on the Hogwarts Express was not kindness, it was ambition born of belief. When Harry refused, pride hardened into disdain, arrogance into armor, and the boy who once extended a hand learned that scorn could shield a bruise deeper than any curse. At Hogwarts, Draco wore his confidence like a crown, immaculate, chilling, perfect. He strode the stone halls with the poise of a prince, his entourage, Crabbe and Goyle, always behind, shadows without voices. He was fastidious, robes ironed, shoes gleaming, his sneer rehearsed in every mirror. He held Snape's favor as proof he belonged. His intellect, his ambition, were dressed in cruelty. He directed his wit like a blade, jibes at the red-haired Weasley's poverty, scorn for Hermione's heritage, jabs at Neville's timid heart. Each insult was a lesson hammered into him. Each stand against others, a performance for approval that always felt small in his chest. But the mask cracked. In the dueling ring, his spells would misfire or falter. When he boasted among peers, his voice sometimes wavered, as if he addressed not them, but his own uncertainty. He was a boy pretending to be a man, his fierceness borrowed from fear. His mastery of occlumency, a talent few knew of, allowed him to hide these fractures. He became adept at shutting down emotion, compartmentalizing pain, so that even keen minds like Snape or Dumbledore could not always read his soul. That quiet defense kept his darkest plans secret, warmed by the cold certainty that mercy was weakness. When the Second Wizarding War surged, the cruel gilding of youth peeled away. Lucius, once untouchable, was imprisoned, and Draco's reality shifted. The family's name, once a shield, became a brand in disgrace. Voldemort returned, demanding of Draco a horror no child should ever bear, the task of murder. At 16, hollow-eyed and broken at the edges, Draco became a pawn on a board he never wished to touch. He spent hours in the Room of Requirement, repairing the ancient vanishing cabinet, coaxing Borgin's counterpart, restoring magic under the weight of threat. Through that cabinet door passed Death Eaters into Hogwarts, a route forged by a boy under strain, a plan brilliantly executed by Draco himself. And though his plans succeeded, the cost stood etched across his face. In mirrors, the smirk vanished. He no longer looked triumphant, only tired, frightened, trapped. And on the tower, before the greatest wizard of his age, wand trembling in his fingers, he could not deliver the final curse. It was not mercy that stayed his hand. It was the spark of what remained human. Tell me, travelers, did that moment save him? Or was it only the first tremor of the man he would one day strive to become? I'd love to know your thoughts. When the war finally ended, the world took stock of its survivors. There were parades for heroes, mourning for martyrs, and silence for those whose loyalties blurred in the smoke. The Malfoy family stood among that silence, neither condemned nor celebrated. They had turned against their master, yes, but too late for gratitude. They had betrayed darkness, but only when it began to swallow their own. Their salvation came not through heroism, but through cooperation. Information traded for mercy, secrets for survival. They were spared Azkaban not because they were forgiven, but because they were still useful. And so began the long unraveling of legacy. The manor in Wiltshire remained, the garden still tended, the marble still gleaming. But inside, something sacred had cracked. Draco felt it in every echo of the corridors, in every portrait that looked down upon him with quiet disappointment. He did not return to Hogwarts. How could he? Those stone walls had seen him at his weakest. Instead, he stayed within his ancestral home, surrounded by relics that now seemed more like evidence. Books lay open across desks, thick tomes on alchemy and transformation, theories of purification, transmutation, rebirth. But this time, the boy who had once sought control searched not for power, but understanding. Rowling herself once wrote that Draco became fascinated with old alchemical manuscripts, and perhaps what he was truly seeking was the quiet miracle of change. In the stillness of his exile, the world outside moved on. The Ministry rebuilt itself. New names replaced old ones. Children of survivors grew up on stories of courage, while Draco sat among dust and memory, a relic of a world that had lost its shine. Then, as quietly as dawn, came Astoria Greengrass, a Slytherin, yes, but untouched by the venom of her house's past. Her family, the Greengrasses, were one of the sacred 28, yet she had long refused to bow to the poison of blood purity. She saw through his family's name, through the armor, through the guilt. Where others whispered coward, she saw a man still learning what it meant to be kind. Their love did not burst like magic. It grew in the pauses between words, in the tea left warm for her on sleepless nights, in the way his voice softened when she entered the room. It was love built of gentleness and exhaustion and healing. But Astoria was not strong of body. She carried within her a blood malediction, an ancient curse that had haunted her lineage for generations. It stole from her slowly, breath by breath, but she bore it with a grace that humbled the man beside her. Her illness changed Draco. He who had once sneered at weakness learned to measure strength by endurance and love by patience. In those years, surrounded by relics of dark history and alchemical diagrams of transformation, Draco Malfoy became something few had thought possible. A man capable of quiet goodness. When Scorpius was born, he held his son as though the world might break him if he blinked. And in that moment, the cycle began to heal. Astoria refused to raise their child on the poison of prejudice. She would not whisper the word mudblood. She would not teach him that purity made him superior. This caused murmurs, even arguments, from Lucius and Narcissa, who could not unlearn their past. But Draco stood beside her, for the first time in his life, defying not his enemies, but his inheritance. They raised their son not to fear difference, but to honor compassion. Draco taught him that courage is not always in defiance. Sometimes it's in restraint. That strength is not in conquest, but in the quiet act of choosing kindness, even when it would be easier not to. The years that followed were not loud. They were tender. Draco remained wealthy, though wealth no longer meant victory. He lived quietly, reclusive, still haunted, still learning, but free. He filled his study with books, and his silence with thought. He still polished the same wand that had once betrayed him, still tended to the roses that Astoria had loved, though she could no longer walk among them. Each petal became a prayer, each night a kind of penance, and when the wind moved through the manor's long halls, he sometimes thought he heard her laughter again, soft, distant, like forgiveness finding its way home. Years later, steam breathes from a scarlet engine, owls stir, trunks clatter, and the arch between platforms shimmers as if remembering every farewell it has ever swallowed. At platform 9 3/4, Draco stands slightly apart, older, quieter, softer, the sharpness of youth filed down to something gentler. Across a river of families, he meets Harry Potter's eyes, just for a moment, and inclines his head, not as rival, not as reckoning, but as a man who walked through the same storm and came out changed. The nod is small, yet inside it lives an entire generation's worth of noise finally falling silent. He no longer seeks to be admired. He asks only to be ordinary, perhaps, if time is kind, to be forgiven. At home, his gallery of relics remains, artifacts behind glass, each with its power muted into memory. Where Lucious Malfoy once kept dark objects as instruments, Draco keeps them as warnings. Old silver still lines the cabinets, but pride has tarnished to humility, like moonlight fading at dawn. He moves differently now, measured, considerate, offering the world small courtesies it never expected from a Malfoy. The patient pause for a stranger, the soft apology when he steps aside, the way his voice lowers when someone is afraid. And then there is Scorpius, quick-minded, kind-eyed, who carries the name but not the burden. When the whistle calls, Draco straightens his son's collar, not to perfect an image but to steady a heart, and as the boy steps onto the train, another figure falls into stride beside him, Albus Potter. Two silhouettes, a Malfoy and a Potter, vanish into the carriages, their laughter blending with steam, and an old feud exhales for the last time. What rivalry once wrote in fury, friendship now edits in grace. Back in Wiltshire, the manor breathes differently. The wards are protective, not secretive. The rooms are lighter, not louder. Draco keeps a study that smells faintly of vellum and rain, alchemical manuscripts stacked like small altars to transformation, margins annotated not with triumphs but with questions. He never sought a philosopher's stone, only the recipe for becoming gentler tomorrow than he was yesterday. In the garden, where Astoria once walked when the world felt heavy, white irises bow their heads in the evening wind. On certain nights he takes tea there, setting a second cup beside him, a habit he has never broken, and listens to the leaves speak the language of the past until the ache eases into something almost like gratitude. Love taught him the difference between possession and presence, and he keeps that lesson like a talisman. Sometimes Narcissa visits, her elegance softer at the edges, and they speak in the hush of things that do not need explaining. Sometimes Lucius sits in the blue room, his cane across his knees, pride dimmed like old silver, and father and son share a long, complicated silence that is, in its way, a form of peace. The world doesn't celebrate what Draco became. There are no banners for quiet decency. But redemption, when it belongs to you, rarely asks for witnesses. It shows itself in the way he lowers his wand, in the way he chooses restraint over spectacle, in the way he refuses to measure worth in blood ever again. And so the Malfoy name, once sharpened into a blade, becomes a lantern, small, steady, carried carefully through the dark for someone else to see by. Draco Malfoy was never the boy who lived. He was the boy who survived himself and learned at last how to pass on a gentler inheritance than the one he received. Thank you, travelers, for standing with me beneath the flicker of the silver quill tonight. If this reflection shifted how you see the Malfoy name, share your thoughts below. Was Draco truly redeemed, or did he simply raise redemption in his son? If calm retellings and cinematic bedtime stories across worlds, from Gothic myth to the universe of Harry Potter and Hogwarts imagined by J.K. Rowling, bring you rest, subscribe, and let the next story find you when the night grows still. Until then, sleep well. Even the proudest hearts can learn to rest, and even the darkest legacies can learn to fade into light.